Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you all for being here for what I believe will be a very informative and well-spent hour hearing from our esteemed panelists during this breakout session titled Climate Policy in a New Administration. My name is Amanda Beal and I'm the Commissioner of the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation and Forestry, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to moderate this session. As we all know, the impacts of our changing climate are producing new challenges and elevated risks for our farmers and ranchers, and the issue has risen to a level of concern and priority for our states and for NASDA as a whole. And in addition to climate resiliency being a priority area for NASDA, NASDA is also one of the founding members of the Food and Climate Agriculture Alliance, which I know we've heard a bit about during this conference so far, which consists of organizations representing farmers, ranchers, forest owners, the food sector, and environmental advocates that are working together to define and promote shared climate policy priorities. This collaborative effort has resulted in a set of joint policy recommendations that, if you are not familiar with them yet, I believe you will want to be. Now today, we have three really dynamic panelists lined up to talk about opportunities to support our producers in meeting the challenges presented by climate change and to be part of the solution on multiple fronts, while also building their climate resiliency. We'll also hear our panelists' thoughts on how climate policy developments with our new federal administration could bolster those efforts. I will introduce our panelists momentarily, and then we will hear from each of them for about 5 minutes initially each. And after that, we'll switch to a Q&A session where I will have some questions for them, and then we'll open it up to our audience. So you can be thinking about what you would like to ask them as we go along here. I will aim to keep us on time and wrap up at the close of the hour, although I'm sure we could talk about this topic for far longer than that. But to get us started, first up, we will be hearing from Fred Krupp. Fred is the president of the Environmental Defense Fund, and he has guided EDF for 3 decades, overseeing its growth from a small nonprofit with a budget of $3 million to one of the world's most influential environmental organizations, with more than 675 employees in the United States, China, Mexico, and Europe, and an annual budget of more than $200 million. A leading voice on climate change, energy, and corporate sustainability, he has pioneered innovative approaches to harnessing the power of the marketplace to protect our environment, beginning with the market-based acid rain reduction plan in the 1990 Clean Air Act that The Economist called, quote, the greatest green success story of the past decade. Fred has continuously broken new ground by engaging in strategic partnerships with major corporations, including FedEx, KKR, McDonald's, and Walmart, to lessen their impact on the environment and drive sectoral change. This work has resulted in the development of hybrid mid-sized trucks, elimination of millions of pounds of packaging waste, removal of hazardous chemicals from thousands of household products, and improvements in energy efficiency across the global supply chain. Educated at Yale and the University of Michigan Law School, he appears frequently in the media. He was named one of America's best leaders by US News and World Report and is a recipient of the 2015 William K. Riley Environmental Leadership Award from the Center for Environmental Policy at American University. And he is co-author with Miriam Horn of the New York Times bestseller, Earth, the Sequel, The Race to Reinvent Energy and Stop Global Warming. Up next, we will hear from Chuck Connor, who became president and CEO of the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives on January 2nd, 2009. As president of NCFC, he oversees the organization's work to promote and protect the business and public policy interests of America's farmer-owned cooperatives. Prior to joining NCFC, he had served as the deputy secretary at the U.S. Department of Agriculture since mid-2005. In this capacity, he was the chief operating officer overseeing day-to-day operations of the department. He interacted daily with President George W. Bush and his senior staff to formulate domestic and international food, trade, security, and energy policy. From August 2007 to January 2008, he served as both USDA Secretary and Deputy Secretary, and he played a key role in developing the administration's immigration policy, including important changes to the H-2A visa program. He served as president of the Corn Refiners Association for more than 4 years, and also served for 17 years as an advisor to U.S. Senator Richard Lugar of Indiana. He's a graduate of Purdue University with a Bachelor's of Science degree and is the recipient of Purdue's Distinguished Alumni Award. He and his wife, Drew, have 4 grown children and 7 grandchildren. And finally, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Mitchell Hora, a farmer and young entrepreneur from Washington, Iowa. His family has farmed in the area for over 100 years and has a strong focus on conservation. When Mitchell is not working with his father on their row crop farm, he runs a consulting company, Continuum Ag, and hosts a podcast focused on soil health called Field Work Podcast. Mitchell founded Continuum Ag, where he has developed a global network and expertise in soil health assessment and improvement. Fieldwork is a podcast that provides space for frank, realistic discussions about the benefits and challenges of sustainable agriculture. Mitchell and fellow row crop farmer Zach Johnson explore the successes and challenges farmers experience as they adopt new practices without greenwashing over the difficulties. So thank you all so much for being here. We're really pleased to have you here today. And so I'm going to turn first to Fred. You will get us started with your opening remarks.
Well, Commissioner Beal, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here today alongside you and the great work of NASDA, and it's been great to be a partner with Chuck and NCFC as well. It's good to be here with Mitchell as well. These are groups that have all rolled up their sleeves and developed a set of recommendations to make agriculture part of the climate solution. And in 2021, I am seeing a real appetite on Capitol Hill for bipartisan climate legislation. I think we're on the verge of starting a whole new era in U.S. agriculture, one where ag has a seat at the table in climate conversations, and where ag is leaning in to the climate conversation like never before. To me, it feels great. The formation of FACA, the Food and Agricultural Climate Alliance, is a powerful first step to ensure that not only America's farmers and ranchers and foresters all are working for climate solutions, but also that the climate solutions are working for them. And collectively, FACA represents farmers and ranchers and foresters and food companies and state governmental officials and environmental advocates like myself, who historically have been in very different places on climate policy. The idea that we're coming together and have been able to agree on common ground, to agree on the need for action, to agree on a set of 40 policy recommendations across the food and forestry value chains to get us there, it is really, I can't overstate how important that is and how important it is on Capitol Hill. If we think back just a couple of years ago to 2019, I think we can all remember the challenges that climate change posed to U.S. agriculture. Record rainfall and flooding, 19 million crop acres that couldn't be planted at the usual time, straining the livelihoods of farmers, highlighting the stress on the crop insurance system. That year, bankers lending to the Midwest reported to the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago that about 70% of their borrowers were at least moderately affected by the extreme weather. So in the face of growing climate impacts, it's become clear now that on-farm conservation solutions can be part of the solution, can lessen greenhouse gas emissions, avoid worsening problems, while also increasing the resilience to the impacts that we're already seeing. Farmers, ranchers, forest owners across the country are feeling the impacts of climate change, wanting to be part of the solution, And at the Environmental Defense Fund, EDF, we want to help everyone that wants to be part of the solution to be part of it in a way that works for them. Again, Commissioner, thank you.
Thank you so much, and very, very interesting and great points about finding common ground. This is a really big issue, and it really is going to take everyone working together to find the solutions. So next, we will turn to Chuck, and we will welcome your remarks. You have about 5 minutes. Not sticking hard to that, but go right ahead.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Beal, and really it's an honor to join NASDA for this event. Over the years, Barb Glenn has become a close friend and colleague in our work together, and we have collaborated on a lot of different things. And it's just a real honor for me to be a part of this organization's event today, as well as work side by side with you on the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance that Fred has so ably described. Let me just start, Commissioner, by first of all, Fred is a humble person, and I will just tell you that it's been about 18 months ago that the Environmental Defense Fund initiated what would ultimately become the Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, and we're grateful to them for doing that. In that they reached out with a fundamental question of, would American agriculture be interested in working with us on, some science-based, some fact-based, some market-based solutions to these looming climate problems. And as Fred described, we're coming off a pretty bad year, and it just seemed to us for a number of reasons that it was the right thing to do. But those of us who have been around the track a few times also acknowledge that this is an area that's been dividing agriculture in the past as well. And I remember 2009 and even attempts really before that to begin to address this issue just really sort of created a lot of consternation out there in farm country. And so we responded cautiously, but indicated a willingness to have some of those initial conversations. And what was interesting is really before doing that and sort of reaching out and working with Fred and some of the folks in his community, we really had to get a sense of whether American agriculture could unite, behind something like this as well. And so in some of those early meetings, just the fundamental question of, could the American Farm Bureau and the National Farmers Union agree on a common policy? And what we found that has really changed over the last decade from probably where we were, the last time there was a major debate in agriculture and climate, was that there has been a change. And there has been, I think, a more of a willingness to lean into this issue. And I will just maybe describe it this way. First of all, I think for a lot of producers out there are seeing the impact of weather and the volatility that it is bringing in terms of change in climate out there. And agriculture has always been a weather, risky business, but we've had some extreme circumstances out there and so I think producers are beginning to realize that. I think our producers are also seeing that in the marketplace, more and more consumers, are seeking information, from them about what they are doing. And this isn't always welcome to agricultural producers out there, but yet, at the same time too, they recognize that the world is a changing place, and that there's more transparency needed in our food and ag system in order to meet consumer demand going forward. So just a whole confluence of things, Commissioner Beal, I think made it the right time, for our response to this outreach from Fred and his team. It was to say yes, and we began to sit down and talk about these things. And, over the course of COVID, I think I probably learned how to Zoom call on conversations with FACA, because we had a lot of them, and we were all sort of isolated from each other. But in the midst of all of that, really put pencil to paper and began to come up with a lot of great ideas where American agriculture can be a great contributor to these climate solutions. And the key point, that I want to stress to this group, and that I stress to my own membership as well, is in leaning into this, we have really concluded that there are some tremendous economic opportunities for our farmers out there. And that's just a key part of this. I couldn't play in this space. I think it's probably true for a lot of other organizations that are key stakeholders in this. If this was something where I was going to have to go out in farm country and say, well, we've done the best we can, and you're going to have to pony up a little bit here, and that's just not a message that's going to sell. I mean, we've got a little better commodity prices in the Midwest right now for some, but these have been tough years on the farm, and there's no sort of extra contributions that can be made. And so the key part of this has got to be, economic opportunities for the farmers going forward. And we believe we've got that in our list of 42 recommendations. And again, it's just fundamental. It's why, you've got Farm Bureau, Farmers Union, ourselves, what my old friend Dale Moore from Farm Bureau calls the long leggers and the short leggers, meaning cattle and hogs and feathers. And, there's just a very, very broad interest in participating in this. And as Fred has described, I think there's there's a lot of issues I don't know about. I've got a pretty good radar for what's important to Congress during these days. And I will just tell you, my radar is telling me that Congress is going to legislate here. They are going to do something on climate change because it's being demanded, and we're ready. I think we're ready with our recommendations. We're ready to do this in a bipartisan way, in a way that brings environment and agriculture together like we haven't seen. And frankly, that's just exciting for us. And so, Fred, again, thank you for your willingness to lean into this. Initially, it's because of that we've, got this coalition together. There were 8 of us in the original coalition, and we're getting ready to add 14 more here probably sometime next week. And it's, we're going to be ready to go. So thank you again.
Great, thank you so much. And it's really interesting to hear your perspective of changes over time, not only in climate change, but which is the obvious, but also changes in sort of the policy climate, and as well as how farmers have been experiencing these different weather patterns and the overall shift in our climate. So next, I want to bring up Mitchell. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts as well here.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. This is really a great honor to be on this panel here today. I'm definitely not worthy by any means, but super excited to be here. And I want to, continue to build off of the rest of the panel. That to me, sustainability on the farm does not matter, or sustainability and this push for sustainability doesn't matter if the farm is not economically sustainable. I'm a 7th generation farmer. Next year will be 150 years. I think I froze up. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I think you're fine.
Oh, sorry. So as a 7th generation Iowa farmer, next year will be 150 years. And if I want to ensure that my family farm is going to still be here another 150 years from now, we've got to be able to make the economics work. We've got to be able to do things more sustainably. We've got to protect our soils. And we've really focused on that on our farm. We started no-tilling corn in 1978. We've been 100% no-till soybean since 1986. 6 years ago, we started really pushing on cover crop. But as you're changing and as you're trying these new things on the farm, and as farmers are feeling more of a pressure to change, there's a lot of barriers that need to be overcome. And these boil down to there's logistic barriers, there's economic barriers, and really risk more than barriers. But in our first year using cover crops, we lost about $100 an acre on our farm in our first cover crop trial. Now, we didn't overcome the logistic risks. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. We didn't know how to reset our planter. We didn't know how to change our herbicide program, our fertilizer program, how to choose, how to seed the cover crop correctly, at what rate. So many of these questions that many farmers don't know, where to turn to, especially back then in 2015. Now the logistics are really getting figured out. There's more resources out there than ever for farmers to be able to overcome and be able to turn to their neighbors, turn to advisors to be able to get advice. They're also now able to really be able to overcome the economic risk as well. with more, focus from the federal and the state side of things for cost share, now with carbon markets or other ecosystem service markets. Really exciting times to be able to drive past those innovators and early adopters of conservation systems on the farm and be able to really continue to scale things up. With a small family farm, only about 700 acres, I knew I needed to be able to have income coming from off the farm to be able to sustain a family. Started Continuum Ag 5 years ago as a soil health consulting company, really helping farmers to quantify soil health, utilizing the Haney soil health test, helping them to be able to manage fertility, factoring in biology, factoring in carbon. We built the first soil health data tool and publicly launched it almost a year ago. It's called Topsoil and helps farmers and consultants to really be able to document soil health. As we are implementing these systems on the farm, farmers need to be equipped with tools that help them to make decisions. I don't think the tools need to make the decisions for them, but utilizing data and technology to scale the science of agriculture so those farmers and their advisors can optimize the art of agriculture. And that's where I think there's opportunity for all of us to continue to work together there, helping farmers really to understand the direct path forward. Farmers are entrepreneurs. Farmers are CEOs. They are the decision makers. They want to continue to be independent, make decisions. I hope that the policies that we're seeing coming out of DC, or for me, coming out of Des Moines, from other state institutions, that these policies need to enable innovation and enable that farmer innovation and U.S. agriculture's innovation, the ability to thrive. So I foresee that coming. I hope it will, but excited to continue to dig into that here on this panel today.
Thank you, Mitchell. And I'm going to disagree with you about something that you said at the beginning, which is that you're not worthy to be on this panel. I think that is completely untrue. And I say that as somebody who grew up on a farm and in a farming family. I just have the utmost respect for the knowledge and experience that farmers have, as well as the incredible work that they do on our behalf. And you bring a lot to this conversation. So thank you for being here as well. So I have a few questions. I'll throw them out there and you can decide if you want to jump in. I won't call on you in any particular order. I'll let you sort of self-select when and if you want to answer them. And when I run out of questions, we'll turn over to the audience and let them ask some questions as well. So the first one that I have here, it says, each of you has a unique and firsthand experience working at the intersections of agriculture and the environment. Can you share your thoughts on the greatest area of opportunity for these communities to work together?
I suppose I can go ahead, Chuck.
Go ahead, Mitchell, please.
Well, I'm just gonna say, I mean, kind of just digging off of some of my opening remarks too on, being able to get these communities to work together. I'm really encouraged that we are seeing the bipartisan support to be able to do this from a policy side of things, even though I always say that soil health, sustainable ag, regenerative ag, whatever, different buzzwords you want to utilize, it shouldn't even necessarily be bipartisan, but be nonpartisan. That this is just the right thing. I think we're seeing the realization of that. Again, allowing that policy to be able to foster that farmer innovation, be able to allow people to work together. I really think that is starting. And a key thing here, allowing for that innovation, is that there's no one size fits all approach, and that there's no silver bullet. My farm to my neighbor's farm across the road is different. Everybody has a different path forward here. And I think a key thing for me is to focus on what's the real net goal, and focusing on, the carbon, the CO2 numbers in the atmosphere, CO2 concentration that's the net goal. Get that reduced. The Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone, get that reduced. That's the goal. Feed people more healthy, more nutritious food. That's the goal. There's lots of different ways to get there. And I'm encouraged to see so many technologies and such a focus, I think, too, from the public and from the consumer looking at agriculture. And actually, there's obviously been a lot of terrible things with COVID, but bringing a lot of people together to focus on doing things smarter and healthier is a positive. that has come out of it, and we'll be excited to see where that goes in the future.
Mhm. Commissioner, I would add as well that I think one of the things that is kind of exciting for us in this space and in the recommendations we came up with is I do believe that we are dealing with a lot of things that farmers and landowners, and I put landowners in there because obviously forestry is a key part of this as well. There's a system in there that I think they're going to be comfortable with. And, you know, we have solved resource problems in the past in American agriculture, and we've done, and I use the example of soil erosion, wetlands preservation, that sort of thing. We have, I don't want to say solved those problems, but we certainly improved our standing with those problems through, you know, programs that involve technical assistance and cost share. And producers are comfortable with that. And I think one of the main reasons they're comfortable with that is, as Mitchell has said, every farm is different. And this is not a system that's built around sort of edicts coming out of Washington, D.C. among people that are trying to sort of do a one size fits all. These are programs that are really sort of initiated at the county level among people that know the county, know the farms, know that region very, very well, and can help tailor, you know, the response to those individual farms. And again, this has been a system that has been tried and tested in the past. It's been pretty darn successful with that sort of cost share and technical assistance. And that's what we've built a lot of our recommendations off of. And in addition to, you know, working, I think producers and landowners are going to find it something they're pretty comfortable with. And that, again, that's exciting stuff.
You know, it's, I completely agree with what both of you said, Mitchell and Chuck, that it can't be one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And farming is so varied. My family has also been involved in farming a little bit, and I've seen different, completely farms that are completely different. But, you know, Chuck, what you said earlier in your opening remarks resonated with me so much because, you know, you gave too much credit to EDF for reaching out, but you also gave a lot of credit for the moment, maybe not enough credit to the moment, because mm-hmm. I don't know if we had reached out 10 years ago, if the time was right. Yeah. But evidence that the time is right is, you know, we've been, you know, it's taken a year or so, but we have reached, you know, this consensus about these 40 recommendations, which help meet the criteria, I think, of what, Mitchell, you put forward. They have to be economically good for farmers. But for example, just a few of them that really make so much sense to me. The idea of promoting at USDA a carbon bank funded by the Commodity Credit Corporation. Mm-hmm. The idea of expanding the natural resource conservation service programs, giving technical assistance, updating conservation practices, the idea of expanding opportunities for farmers to deploy renewable energy technologies that are related to farm activities, for instance, capture methane, or expanding the popular Rural Energy for America program. These and substantial investments in research focusing on improving the measurement and monitoring of soil and forest carbon sequestration, and conducting demonstrations that could open up this income flow for farmers. Yep. Once we have this research. And importantly, we've all agreed that the overarching goal is to do no harm, that whatever policies are put forth to address climate have to be thoughtfully crafted and informed by their broader consequences and trade-offs and inequities. And we don't want to do any harm to farmers. That's principle number one. So anyway, that's what I'm excited about.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. Your optimism is really uplifting, and it's great to hear this, you know, idea that there are opportunities both to address the challenges and also to have it work for farmers. I think that's really important. The next question I have, we'll talk a little bit more about this moment, when the 117th Congress ends and we are officially halfway into the current administration, how will we know if we're making the needed progress around climate resiliency?
Well, Commissioner, I think, for my own measurement, being a product of the, the legislative process, I would really like to see successful bipartisan legislation passed dealing with climate. And obviously I say that for two reasons. Key is bipartisan. This is, again, something, as Fred has described, a different circumstance than perhaps where we were a decade ago, but legislation also, establishes this in law and I think has some more longevity and farmers can plan around it. I mean, we know that, as Mitchell has described, 150 years is a long time for a farm. I mean, farmers aren't typically, planning 1 or 2, years down the road. They're very generational. And so just having the stability of something that's passed legislatively, and that's not to say there won't be a role probably for some administrative actions where necessary, but the more we can encompass in a bipartisan bill that is passed by 2 bodies of Congress and signed into law by the president, I think it creates that environment and that stability that we need to put us on the path here for climate friendly policies for a long time. And I think that serves everybody's interest.
Boy, I so agree with you, Chuck. It's got to be bipartisan because bipartisan makes it durable. The last thing we need is some political football that is passed with just 50 votes. That is not the way to do this. And Environmental Defense Fund, we sometimes take some flack for the opinion, the commitment we have to bipartisanship, but it's the only way to make durable progress. I think about, the recent polar vortex and how it affected Texas. And by the way, we have no idea if that was caused by climate change or not. Mm-hmm. The science is not clear on that. But I think what is clear is we are seeing more and more extreme weather events, and we've got to invest in resilience. So to the questioner, I would say, hopefully, in a bipartisan way, we can figure out sensible policies, both on cutting these emission of greenhouse gases and also making some critical investments in resilience of our infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When I think about, what is it going to look like here in a couple of years and how do we know if we're going to be making progress? I first go to, let's quantify that end goal. What are the actual numbers of, what is the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere? Somewhere around 415 part per million CO2 here today. Can we at least be stabilizing that, hopefully starting to maybe get it to come down just a little bit in a couple of years? That'd be awesome. Can we see improvements too? Like I said, hypoxic zone or other outcomes that are really desirable, but make sure that we do it in a manner that for the farm helps them to be economically resilient and environmentally more sustainable and be able to be more resilient against some of these issues. On our farm last year, we were in an area where there was some pretty bad drought. But our yields and our profitability was able to maintain because of the soils that we've built up. Mm-hmm. We've quantified that now we can infiltrate a 4-inch rainfall in less than 5 minutes. Just amazing, the ability to utilize cover crop, utilize no-till, utilize these principles of soil health to improve the structure and be more resilient. One of the things too that I hope, I don't know that we will have it done in 2 years, but something that I hope can continue to progress is that as we're looking at carbon or other ecosystem services, that this, I truly believe, can be profitable for everybody, that it can be profitable for the farmer, that everybody can be compensated adequately. I think the advisors to the farmers, the retailers and such that are out there as well, the landowner, and the consumer and food industries, everybody can improve profitability here by looking at what does it cost today? What are some of the costs today to mitigate or sequester carbon in other ways? What is the cost to clean up drinking water? What is the cost of not as nutritious food as what we should have? What is the cost for medicine or to fend off diseases based on the lack of nutrient density that we have in our food today? By quantifying what it costs today, we can now implement systems that can be profitable for everybody. That's something that I think will really progress in the next couple of years, to help these systems to scale and really to be self-sufficient for the long haul.
That's great. Mitchell, I really appreciate that you brought up cost. So here in Maine, we have a Maine Climate Council that just recently, we released a climate action plan, and I was co-chairing the Natural and Working Lands group for the past year. And there was a comment that somebody made on that in that working group that has just stuck with me. And they said, climate change will reorganize our economy, whether we want it to or not. And so, you know, there are things that we're spending money on now that we could be thinking about, you know, spending money on in different ways that could lead to more opportunities to take that, you know, translate science to practice, like what you're talking about on your farm and how it's helping you to be more resilient. So that's just such an important point. Another question I have here, each of you works with farmers and or environmentalists on the ground level, combating climate challenges every single day. What is one thing you think these people on the front lines would want Washington policymakers or the public at large to know?
A big portion of my membership, Commissioner Beal, are ag retailers who are, you know, in the business of providing seed, you know, feed and fertilizer to farmers to produce the crops that they grow so well. And I think in talking to our members, and of course we are farmer-owned cooperatives, so everything we do is about, you know, serving the interests of our members. But I think for our members, the farmers are looking for as much help as they can to you know, meet their yield goals, you know, meet what they have to do in order to cover costs, you know, at the least possible price, you know, that they can. And they're just, you know, they're looking for information from our retailers at this point. You know, they're looking for guidance, information. There's, I think Mitchell said it, you know, earlier, when you're making these kinds of transitions, you know, a lot of producers can't afford to, you know, a year or two of, well, I didn't quite get that right. You know, I'm learning, and that's tough, you know, during tough economic times. And they're looking to our leaders to help them do the best that they possibly can without having to go through that period of, oh, I wish I would have done things a lot differently. And that's an information game, and that's becoming critical to so much of what we do. And I think it's going to be critical to the climate debate as well. Good information, good agronomic practices.
So I can jump in with a couple of things, especially, you know, in talking with policymakers in Washington or some of my local policymakers here in Iowa. You know, I think it's really critical to make them aware, you know, kind of Chuck, to your point of as we implement these things, there's lots of other triggers as well. Things like cover crop. If we're going to continue to scale cover crop, we've got to be able to have the seed come from somewhere. The seed that's needed is not in existence today. We have to be able to continue to scale that out or scale out other infrastructure to ensure that the equipment is there, that you know, obviously we have issues with workers and laborers in agriculture. Who's going to plant all of this cover crop? You know, things like that. There's other logistic concerns. That's why I like, you know, continuing to allow this to progress and utilize policy to foster that innovation and continue to drive things without having the regulation being too overbearing. But what I really wanted to hit on here and bring to the table, specifically around carbon and carbon markets, is that I think some of these carbon markets today are set up wrong, in that carbon markets today are really another cost share for practice change. They're looking at what are your practices today, and we'll pay you to change some practices going forward. I think that's okay. but it completely alienates the innovators, the early adopters that have been doing these things. And I don't know if we really solve the problem. We make some change. We do continue to foster adoption of better conservation systems. That's great. But what I think we need to really look at on a policy side of things, or in the carbon markets, on the models and on the science side of things, is what is that farm's net bottom line carbon sequestration? What is that farm's net bottom line impact to water quality or water efficiencies or nutrient density? Right now we're looking at yield, but what is that net bottom line on an annual basis? How innovative can that farmer be? How far can they really push it, where it's not just how many practices do they do, or are they checking the boxes, but really how innovative can they get? And I encourage, our policymakers to continue to invest in science, to allow farmers to be creative, to really push and really sequester as much carbon as they can, not just do the minimum, to be able to extract a new payment system and really exploit some issues that could come about there.
Yeah, I really like both what Chuck and Mitch have said. From my perspective, the idea that, nobody knows it all. We need to be flexible. We need to foster innovation. We need to have legislation that increases R&D. There's some things that the Department of Agriculture can do. The Carbon Bank is an example without legislation. I think getting going with some pilots to begin with, so it's not, all spelled out in great detail, but try a few different things, see what works best for farmers, and then scale that up after, trying it out and, seeing how it fits. That to me, being flexible and I think the message that I've heard when I've talked to farmers is a lot of these changes that have been talked about are doable. I wish people on Capitol Hill could hear that more, that these things are doable. It's worth supporting, the bipartisan effort that we've got going, the Growing Solutions Act. It's worth supporting the idea of a carbon bank, because with these new policies, farmers can expand the amount that they can contribute.
Right.
In a compensated way, I should say.
That's great. Thank you so much. Here's the last question I have, and we'll let you do a round, and then we'll turn to the audience here. Our conference theme is Together at the Table. In the spirit of that, when we look at the climate change and agricultural policy conversation, who is not at the table? Who do we still need to hear from?
I'd like to build off of Fred's comment there, actually, for my thoughts on this, that, I definitely hope that, Growing Climate Solutions Act, Carbon Bank, all for them, and definitely hope that they really push for more R&D. And yes, that needs to go through USDA, through NRCS, but also through utilize those innovative farmers. I think they're the people that really need to be brought to the table more on this one. Farmers that have been there, done that. They've overcome, they've been able to withstand, they've gone through the trials and tribulations of adding things like cover crops or reducing tillage or going to organic or regenerative organic on their farms. I think those farmers can be leveraged more. And I think they can be utilized to be the champions in this, to bring other farmers along. Now, we do hear about the farmers that are there. There's some real key farmers that they have made it, and they are doing amazing. We need to utilize those guys, but a lot of farmers can get turned off by that, saying, well, that guy's been doing this for 40 years. I'm way over here. How could I ever possibly reach to that level? So I think we also lean into farmers that are being innovative today, that are making those strides to change and continue to improve upon their operations. I think we can really leverage those people, bring them to the table more. I better bring a plug back to the podcast. I neglected to mention it earlier, but the Fieldwork podcast that I co-host is put on by American Public Media. We just dropped our our teaser episode here today. And episodes start next Wednesday for season 3. But there we do have those conversations with those innovative farmers that are really in the trenches to get their perspective. So I just had to toss that one back out there here as well, so I don't forget.
Yeah, I would say that, hasn't been at the table, should be at the table would be Black farmers, Latino farmers, Indigenous farmers. They need to be part of the conversation too. Some of the conservation practices that we're championing now, like cover crops, no-till, riparian buffers, they've been used for centuries by Native Americans and Black farmers. Farm workers would be another example. They should be at the table. A lot of farm workers are at the front lines experiencing climate impacts, whether it's increased temperatures or the seasonal variability that's increasing, or, changing practices to adapt to all this, keeping these folks safe and keeping the fields productive and the communities vibrant. This is all important. It can't just be, exclusively white-led agricultural or environmental organizations shutting them out. So we've got to change that. We've got to welcome everybody to the table and make sure that we hear their voices, and that, the policies are resilient, equitable, and just. So those are some of my thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all really good points, Commissioner. I don't disagree with anything that's been said here. Perhaps I'll just share with you a concern that I hear out in the countryside, and this may then reflect additional people that need to be brought into the mix here. And I think there's a fear that if farmers and agriculture do sort of, if you will, step up to the plate, for lack of a better term here, and as Mitchell describes, try and lean into this thing, in innovative sorts of ways. I think there is a hope that they will get credit for this among those that have been, critical of our farming sector in the past. And I sort of, again, use that term a little generically, but I will tell you that really does eat at farmers' craw when they feel like they're not appreciated, given all the perils that they face, out there to, even in a COVID year where, maybe there were a few instances where we walked into a grocery store and, had 9 choices instead of 12 or something like that. But for the most part, even in a pandemic, we all came out of it pretty well fed, and, we've got farmers to thank for that. And I think
So true.
the extent we can, bring in maybe some of our detractors a little bit more into this process and say, you guys aren't so bad after all, and thank you for leaning into this issue. It would help our cause, probably.
Great point.
Yes, thank you all. Those are all great points. And we have a few minutes here. I think we can take some audience questions, and I am going to leave it to, we have some wonderful NASDA staff that are making everything work well in the background here, and I think they've got the questions in front of them.
Our first question is from Director Kettler from Indiana, and he asks, how do we ensure that farmers truly benefit economically in a meaningful way and not the small typical slice that they get from most crops and livestock?
Yeah, it's a great question, Commissioner. And again, I go back to some of those historical models that we've used with technical assistance and cost share. And these are voluntary programs, and that that's a key part of this. There's nothing out there that says you will do this, and that was sort of one of our fundamental principles that we agreed with Fred, that these are voluntary incentive programs. And my past tells me that those voluntary incentives programs, along with the technical assistance, gave the producers the tools they need to make those kind of long-term investments. And that's what we've modeled it after in terms of climate-friendly policies. And I just rely upon that experience of the past to believe that it is going to be substantial enough And at the end of the day, remember, it is voluntary for the producer. We're not, gonna hold their feet to the fire to do anything that is uneconomical on their own farm. Our challenge is to make it economical for as many as possible. And I think, we're poised to do that.
One thing I would say, Director, is that I've talked a little bit about a carbon bank and how you could do pilots for this under existing authority, under the Commodity Credit Corporation. But one thing you could do, if we can increase the Commodity Credit Corporation borrowing authority so that nothing that we're talking about carbon impedes the other critically important ongoing operations of the CCC, crop insurance and mandatory conservation programs. One thing, assuming that's true and you increase the authority, we could set a floor price for carbon sequestration. So when someone sequesters, methane from on-farm manure or, in a verified way, carbon in the soil, they know that like other commodities that are produced on the farm, there's a stable expectation for what a floor price would be. So that is my one answer to your question. How do you make sure it's not a trivial amount?
Yeah, and Fred, I really agree with you there. And looking at that floor price and ensuring that we're looking at what is the cost to the farmer of sequestering that ton of carbon. And I don't know that the carbon market needs to offset the entire cost of that. The farmer needs to have, some skin in the game as well. And they need to be looking very holistically. And that's my answer to this is getting the focus away from bushels and debt that really drives a lot of that farmer's decisions today, meaning cash flow driven by maximum bushels or maximum crop that they're producing on their farm, to really helping farmers to realize what is their bottom line profitability and how do I ensure that my inputs, my expenses, and my outcomes at the end of the day ensure that I'm going to be really long-term resilient, ensuring that I've got that profitability at the end of the day to be able to invest in that family farm, invest in those rural communities, and have dollars in the pocket at the end of the day. So I think it's enabling the technology there. Well, and the transparency, I think, is a key piece of that. So transparency in carbon markets to ensure that from the buyer, the end buyer, to that farmer, there's not too many hands taken away and chipping away at that dollar going to the farmer. That when farmers, have dollars, they invest in their farms, they invest in their rural communities, their schools, their churches, things like that. And I think, ensuring that farmer does get their fair share is critical. But farmers also need to say, we are going to ensure that we're going to be price makers in these ecosystem service markets and not just rely on being price takers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just want to add one quick thing because I gave a specific answer about the Commodity Credit Corporation. And I think the more general answer, I want to go right back to the reason EDF reached out to you, Chuck, and others in the agriculture. We do not want to be developing climate policies in some back room. We recognize that the only way this is going to work, the fundamental principle is we want to build this with you, with farmers, so it works for farmers. That's the only way this can be done. So I guess that's the bigger answer. And I hope anyone listening understands that's exactly the way we proceeded in developing these 40 recommendations.
Well, I think that's a great place to sort of end here for today, although I really do regret that this hour is coming to a close. I knew it was going to go by far too quickly, but you all have given us so much to think about. I've taken a lot of notes myself. And I just, on behalf of NASDA, I want to thank you so much for your time today. It's really been a pleasure, and we truly appreciate you sharing your expertise with us all here and for your time. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Commissioner Beal.
Yeah, thank you. And Fred, to your point, last thing is farmers are ready to be part of the solution here. And Chuck, you mentioned it earlier, and that's what's really encouraging here is saying, hey, we have all contributed to issues, and now we're all ready to be part of a solution. And it's time to go get it done. So
let's get it done.
No, that's true. Thank you.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, everybody.